us to open this up and have a conversation about these issues. I would encourage all of you to jump into the conversation. That way it could be called on individually. And be sure that thoughts and concerns that you have, and if you want to ask questions of the other panelists, please do that as well. Let me start, Jerry, with you. And you were involved in the Deepwater Horizon issue. Could you tell us what you learned from that?
Well, what did we learn from Deepwater Horizon? It's a loaded question. Let me stick to the geospatial side of things. That was really the first example in my tenure of the expectations of the current administration for being able to get things out immediately. This was not, we're going to think about and consternate on how we do this work and what it is we want to message to the public. But there was very clearly a driver from the senior political layers at EPA and the White House to publish what you have now and fix it later if the quality has not improved. And that's a big cultural change for a predominantly regulatory agency like EPA, where we are much more used to having our data go through very careful, chain of custody and controlled QA/QC and other things. And we were really challenged in technology, but more so in policy in terms of what do we have right now and how do we get that data out into the web. With regards to that, that was a real opportunity for us to start to work across agencies. And some people have heard of this Federal Geospatial Platform Initiative. That was really how we kicked that off. It was a discussion among myself, my counterparts at DOI, at NOAA, at DHS, and at AG, and NASA, I believe, were in the room, talking about how do we promote some of these cross-boundary sharing things right now, using the incident, the Deepwater Horizon event as our way of getting a shared publishing platform to get cross-agency data out. And I think we were largely, thanks to NOAA, I should point out, we were very successful in that initial attempt. They went from not having anything on their public website to having something that was not only stood up over the course of a very long 3 or 4 days, but something that was featured on CNN, and they used it on the Magic Wall to describe the event. And that's really what we should be providing in terms of data, is something that other people can use to help tell the story it is that we're trying to tell from a geographic context. And I think we've learned some of those lessons since then. We built some procedures, some technology during Deepwater Horizon that we're using right now in responding to the flooding in Mississippi. Earlier in the spring, the Fukushima incident, EPA was able to publish data from our radiation network within 2 or 3 days. This didn't take us weeks of consternation and trying to figure out how to get the data out there. It's becoming a part of our DNA, I guess, and really the way that we respond to this spill. So I think we've learned to be more agile.
I would just, so we do a lot of disaster stuff as well, and disasters is probably the area where the response and the infrastructure is most effective. And the thing that's really helped in that regard is the singleness of purpose. We know exactly what we were supposed to be showing, and so we know clearly what problem there is to solve. And once you have that kind of focus, you really can think creatively about how you apply the tools to answer the specific questions. So for us as well, we have improved exponentially in terms of how quickly we get our information, the maps that we produce about where HUD assets are, where people who get assistance, who are likely to be in significant need, we can get to those people much faster and much more effectively, and understand the scale of the problem in ways that we hadn't been able to before. And it's hours in many of these instances, and it really is a tremendous transformation.
Yeah, just to follow on to Raphael's comment, I know some of the recent disasters that we've seen, within hours, significant geospatial resources are being stood up and being consumed and contributed to by the community. And I can't say enough about the impact of this data being made available. And I think the moral of the story here is that sometimes it's not the technology, it's not the standards, it's really the policy decision. And when you have these kinds of events, it's easy to get through that policy decision. But more importantly, what fascinates me, and I want to just ask the other panelists about this because we didn't talk too much about it, is the impact of VGI, volunteer geospatial information, has been just tremendous from the community through platforms like Ushahidi and Sahana, organizing people, professionals around the world to aggregate and provide information to support these types of opportunities. So I was just going to ask the panelists what might be happening in that area of consuming and using VGI.
So before I answer that, but it did, and I will answer that. The first piece is, we all come together in a crisis. Everybody comes together in a crisis. It's what we do. It's in our nature to help each other. I think there's a lack of appreciation for what it takes to be ready for the crisis. You cannot just have the crisis happen without having content and services already, at least in some fashion or manner, being pre-positioned. It would be a mistake not to understand the impact of operational costs to surge, because when I surge to a crisis, especially in my agency, and we do that quite frequently in many different instances, I have to take resources away from other things to do that. But I can't not do the other things that I still have to do in terms of operational support. So the ability to have at your core the way you understand your problem set and you attack the problem is to be agile and flexible from the outset. Because if you don't think in terms of agility from how you practice day in and day out, you cannot surge through a crisis. You must have an internal capability to be able to respond. So you have to be able to have that as a practice, as a core capability, and you have to be able to have the content and services to do that, to surge to. With regard to the VGI, especially, I think the biggest, at least my observation was in Haiti, it was huge. Had we not had an open framework, though, to exchange content, understand the pedigree of the information, although I think the processes were still catching up. This is where I'll go back and say, kind of depends. You're going to have to watch the pedigree of the data and the information that's coming in, because you need to make sure that at some level it's valid. Although, having done things myself in my youth, I would use the best information that I have. So if I have it and I have nothing, I'm going to use what I have. But I am going to use it with a weary eye, maybe, depending on where it came from and what its pedigree was. But again, if I didn't build from a perspective of I could have to change tomorrow, I could have to refocus tomorrow, I could have to shift tomorrow, you need to have that at some level integrated in your core how you look at things. And I don't know that across all of government we kind of look at that as an equal responsibility or a category that we all have to be able to do. But to be able to surge and to already have capability in place, that's critical. And it should not be underappreciated.
So, I think I'll comment on both threads here. I'll get to the crowdsource one in a second, but in our perspective at the FCC, we're not operating in the same kind of crisis mode as other agencies with response to some emergencies, although we do have our own SCIF and EOC and so forth. That being said, I can't underscore enough what Keith's talking about with the notion of agility. And it should be part of our regular process to make a fundamental goal of every product, data or policy decision or otherwise, that includes a time to market component. It has to be. We have to have our data products have a fast time to market. I'll be the first to say that FCC isn't known for this. But it's becoming much more apparent that when we make policy decisions about an industry that's 7% of the GDP using 2-year-old data, we have a significant problem. And we need to be able to publish data and use that publication in a very fast time to market that allows the currency to reflect the problem. So the notion of time as Mark hit on is really, really important. So recognizing we have big disasters and those disasters require agility, the agility has to be in place in the day-to-day process so that time to market on products is significant, is fast. The crowdsource one I think is really interesting. And we haven't played much with Ushahidi or other things, but we did engage in two applications. One, we began opening all of our document proceedings to open comment via web comment. It used to be, the FCC, that you wanted to comment on an open proceeding, you had to come down, file paperwork, and be in our library, our resource center, and actually in person. When we changed that open proceeding process to allow files of comments on open dockets, it meant that you could be anywhere and do them at midnight or at 8 a.m. or whatever value proposition you needed. The second one is we employed a speed test so that people could test their broadband upload and download speed. And we took it a little step further. So the common speed tests just give you the report back, like, hey, your speed is this at this instant. We require that the user enter in where they are, or publish it as a mobile app and employ the GPS component of the mobile app, so that we know the exact location of the speed test. And that really makes it far superior than other products that just try and map the location via IP, which has all kinds of inherent geospatial problems to deal with it. So in this employee test, I think we've been on for about a year now, and we have over 2.5 million tests. So in the first 2 months, I think it went to like 750,000. It just skyrocketed. So using that as a data asset has been really, really important to us.
Let me shift just a little bit back to this question of agency policy. And we have the agencies. We work on the organizational base from the agencies. HUD has been an agency that has taken a place-based approach for quite some time. In fact, we had a communication from Henry Cisneros, who's the former secretary of HUD in the 90s, who was also, by the way, a fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration and has a PhD in public administration. What he noted was that the place-based thinking that they were using at HUD in the 90s had the advantages of helping to integrate efforts across organizational silos, to establish accountability on location, and to put the national structure at the service of practical local priorities. Raphael, could you comment on that? How does that parse with what you all are doing at the present time?
First of all, I love Henry. So he is a tremendous leader and a real visionary, and always a pleasure to listen to. If you ever get a chance, you should do that. He's exactly right. We do that all the time. For us, the real challenge has been sustained engagement and sustained application of technology. One of the things that I've been intensely sensitive to is the fleeting nature of initiatives. Initiatives start all the time. They're replaced, they're cut, they're changed. And the real challenge for these exercises and this sort of effort is to have it not be an initiative. Have it actually become an integrated, fundamental part of everything that we do. So what we're trying to do is really change the rules to say, if you're going to participate in a program, you must produce a map. You must demonstrate things in a geospatial way, and have it be regulatory. Have it be part of the full process, both in terms of what we expect of ourselves. So when we're having processes where, if you're going to put out information, if you're going to provide information that grantees must use, it has to have these sorts of configurations. It has to have functionalities that allow place to be emphasized. But then ask the grantees as well to, in their processes, engage in the place-based orientation. Are you talking to your neighbors, the people who are close to you, to think about how a decision might impact them as well? What other resources are being leveraged? One thing I think is really important to talk about, you call it data pedigree. I just say bad data. There's a lot of data out there that is either bad or absent, And it's difficult to imagine how you do this without having a real data collection protocol that mandates a certain level of quality. And our systems, and this is sort of the second piece to this, it requires ongoing and committed investment in the foundational technology and infrastructure. And in, at least for our agency, budget considerations, priorities, all those sorts of things have meant that we've been fits and starts in just the basics. So we have programs that systems are still based on COBOL, written in the 80s, right? And so when you think about that kind of environment, the challenges become very significant. But it gets back to why we need singles, right? Because I need to be able to go to my appropriators and say, okay, with a little bit of resources, we did something pretty significant. You need to give us more to allow us to do more. So we're doing a lot of plays. I think that our challenge and our goal is really to find as many ways as possible to create an expectation of place that leverages geospatial and other technologies to be effective.
Could I ask if some of the other agency representatives could comment on that? You see, what we have developing here is, on the one hand, periodic initiatives that come from the very tops, from the White House or from OMB, that says it's time for us to get our act together and figure out how we can integrate. And then, if there isn't sustained leadership for that, it tends to fade. And what Raphael is saying is, here's an agency that shows a clear history of having some continuity of effort for place-based initiatives that really need to be converted into what we do as a practical matter, not just a periodic initiative. But what it also says is that each agency is developing its own approach to place-based initiatives, which raises the possibility that you tend to reinforce the siloing or the fragmentation, and thus there is some consistency of the way each is doing this. Could the others of you from agencies comment on it?
So, just a couple of thoughts, and I'll characterize them just as thoughts. I don't know that we need everybody to be able to build a map so much as we need to be able to represent data on a map to provide context. Right? So there's a big distinction, and typically it's when you try to build this big project and it gets too big and it's unwieldy, and that's kind of where initiatives implode under their own weight. Instead of taking an approach where we say, you know what, the fact that I have data, the fact that the data actually is tagged, and I'll say, I don't want to say into, building huge taxonomies and ontologies that we can never close on, but that I tag a place, a location, at a time, and its reference of importance to how it, i.e. police reports or, flooding zones, or, you could have a whole list, your bandwidth. That just as a record that gets tagged in a way that's temporal and spatial, that I can represent it back to a map in a way where I can then aggregate or conflate data so that I can look at it in different ways. If we took a more simple approach to how we share data and data and content, I think that we would have more success and achievable in the results. And I say that knowing in my heart that the biggest problem there, at least from my observations for almost 30 years, is that organizations don't justify their budgets on how well they share or collaborate. They justify their budgets on what their value to the data they own are. So the cultural aspect of how we incentivize positive behavior and how we share data, how we tag in and work those interfaces is critical. And it is cultural. It's not a technology, and it's not a initiative that says we're going to go build this Uber database that we will never build. We will never build it. I have this running dialogue with my own folks. Nobody built the internet. It was an art or a social network, and people go, but Facebook. Well, Facebook's not the social network. It's a piece of it. You have to understand the relationships of all those other applications. So I think at the core it becomes how you look at data, how you tag data, and how you make data available and representable in a way that makes it easier for folks, and that visualization aspect. Because I think once you start to do that, then there's real power there. And I don't think there's bad data. I think all data gives me a perspective on what I don't want to do or what I do want to do.
I'll invite you down to head to
I believe it. I mean, I say that tongue in cheek, knowing that also there are no such things as a stupid question.
So I'll touch on a couple things. I think Raphael put things really, really well. In our environment, we're a regulatory agency. So we have, I've been told anecdotally, the highest percentage of lawyers per capita in an agency in the world. I think it's bigger than DOJ. So ratio of lawyers to total number of employees. As a regulatory agency, we recognize that every decision we make has some policy implication on place. And over the 60, 70 years, now 80 years since the early Telecom Act, where we set up data collections, they need to be changed. Those collections were established very early on, and we took very liberal approaches with the Paperwork Reduction Act, such that we have over 400 PRAs registered. We have a huge number of PRAs, and we're looking at each one going, why are we collecting it this way? Is that an undue burden? If so, let's change that, or let's make it slightly different. And the great example recently is the 700 megahertz spectrum realm, the cellular realm. We now, we realized that our business process for how we were collecting that, which was a giant PDF from every company, 8-inch thick PDF document that said, this is where I'm going to manage that license of spectrum. We've said that's great, but also give us the engineering spec for the footprint of that, your license availability, and give that to us in an open, standard like a GIS polygon or what have you. And the time that saved our engineers from just going down and looking, okay, here's where they're proposing that footprint, and here's where the potential interference is on other things, we need to modify that application, has been really significant. I mean, I don't have the hour count, but it's fantastically improved. So the whole idea that we need to constantly look at our regular process as a regulatory agency and go, is there a faster, better way that makes us do things and provides less of a burden on the industry to give us information, basically results in give us digital data and make that data geospatial.
I think the other panelists have summarized a lot of the issues well, but one thing that I'd add that I don't think was emphasized in some of the other comments about making sure that the work that we're doing sustains the life of any single initiative is something that's very much on our minds at EPA as we look at implementing this community-based activity in particular. And it gets back to something I said earlier about emergency response, and it's how do you change the culture, and how do we use this project to change the way that people work at the EPA is really something that we're fundamentally trying to do, and our political leadership is very cognizant of this in this particular instance, and are making sure that the senior career executives of the agency are a part of this process. And I think that's key, that this has to go beyond being an initiative of any one administration. We all realize on my team that this is our opportunity to quickly change the culture of the agency and to work, to use technology as a way to change behaviors and to change expectations in the way that people work. And I think the lessons for our group and looking back at past IT projects is we need to be quick. Agility, being able to build things, stand them up quickly and get reactions to them, and not do what I'm sure many of us have done in the past, which is spend 2 or 3 years planning something, run out of money, run out of steam, and give up. Or do something that really doesn't meet the initial stage purpose of what we're doing. So try and get something out quick, iterate quickly, and really start to get feedback. I think, going back to all of our earlier points about being specific about what it is that you're trying to achieve, I think that means that we need to work through, I hate to call them pilot projects, but examples, use cases, business cases of how we're changing the way that our lines of business at the agency operate. And don't be afraid to prototype and start to roll things out quickly and see how people react on the technology side and on the policy side.
And I would say, yeah, that's actually true, perhaps more so at the local level. So, there is a tremendous opportunity at the local level to be leveraging these sorts of technologies to think about the totality of the resources that they have at their disposal. But the decisions that they face usually aren't couched in that type of format. So what we've been trying to do, I've been encouraging systems that we've been developing, go to planning commissions, offer to give it to local governments when they're thinking about their disaster plan. We went to Galveston to show them an inundation tool to say, okay, where are your critical assets if something happens, or does this exit, or this evacuation strategy, is it going to work, right? Those sort of basic questions, and just put it out there in front of people in the spaces where they're making decisions as these pilots try to incentivize that. I think there's a lot more that can be done in that regard.
So, I mean, I hate to beat a dead horse, but I think both, everyone's made the point really eloquently. The whole notion of prototyping fits into the agile development cycle, and one of the things that we've seen just from a federal procurement IT point of view is the opportunity to prototype before we release the FRQ makes our cost and our total cost of ownership and our product lifestyle significantly increase in value. And if we don't, we end up writing RFQ specs and letting out a bid and getting a waterfall method that ends up in a 4-year time cycle that gets us a product that we don't want. So, yeah.
I mentioned earlier that the National Academy of Public Administration has had a long-standing interest in both the area of place-based management and also geographical and geospatial data. NAPA issued a report in 1998 that was called Geographic Information for the 21st Century, Building a Strategy for the Nation. And as I read that, I was thinking back and I was thinking, I wonder if George Washington, who was a surveyor, kind of a techie himself, might have thought of getting Alexander Hamilton, among his other reports that he was doing at the time, to do a report on geographic information for the 19th century, building a strategy for the nation. The principal recommendation that came out of that report was the development of a national spatial data infrastructure, NSDI, and in fact the report laid out an ideal NSDI. Does that approach still make sense? Has there been progress in developing such a thing? Should we be thinking about such a thing? Or, based on the conversation that we've been having here, does it suggest that we need to be thinking a little from a somewhat different angle about how we characterize this infrastructure? Keith?
That's a great question. I would tell you that it's probably still important, though the execution plan would not likely be relevant still because of the change in technology. I mean, Moore's Law has almost leaped 2 years in the last 18 months. In fact, some of the other comments on standards, I'm a balanced person, right? Life's got to have balance to it. You have to have regulations. We have to have rules that prevent abuse of the system, but allow us to have leeway in how we execute. And so to sit and say that I'm going to have any single infrastructure that supports multiple domains, I think is I don't think you ever get there, because I think it's unaffordable. However, the way that technology's adapted over time in terms of commodity processing and commodity storage, instead of saying the word cloud, break down elements to say, with the advent of the virtual processing machine, the advent of ability to get processing as a commodity or storage as a commodity, it's allowed us to change how we look at infrastructure separate from applications and data and content. Simply put, your phone doesn't actually have data on it. It interacts with other elements of infrastructure that has access to data. And when you want to get the walking turn-by-turn navigation from this place to the metro, it doesn't process that. It calls another service to other virtual processors that gives you that response. And it displays it in a way that's understandable to you. So if I go back to that document from 1998, it did not lead us that direction. It went in a separate direction in terms of establishing an infrastructure and taxonomy and ontology, to use terms from today. It's interesting, I was part of the team that built designed this thing called the DCGS, Distributed common ground system integrated backbone. At that time, we actually defined specific kind of product lines that people needed to use because we were jumping from a systems approach to a service-oriented architecture approach from a technology perspective. We're way past that now. I would much rather see technology lead in terms of infrastructure and protect the government's interests to get to those other capabilities and capacities.
Anybody else? Yeah, Mark.
I agree with Keith's comments. I think the NSDI approach has been incredibly important for the community. It sets up a basic premise and some core precepts that I think are still alive today. At the same time, technology marches on, and that process itself has to be agile to accommodate that. So I agree with everything you said. If you look at it now, today's NSDI, today's SDI is the GeoWeb. It's sensor web. It's semantic mediation. It's well beyond anything that we talked about in those days, but I don't think there's anything in that report that constrained us or constrained technology from moving in that direction. I think it's really about that collaborative nexus between industry, government, and all the players to be able to mind share at a certain level and allow that innovation to interweave with what I call interoperability through interfaces and standards. And Keith, you're right. I mean, there are points at which something is on the cresting wave and the discipline and standards isn't there yet. You move forward, and the process itself will then accommodate it as it rolls out and becomes much more used in the community. So I just go back and say I think there's a lot of goodness in what's been created. I think the focus on the demand side is incredibly important, and the agility to embrace and integrate rapidly new technologies and techniques is important too. And I think we've been talking about that here today in the panel, how we accomplish that. Go ahead.
I agree with everything everyone said, but I think it's important to keep in mind one or two things. Raphael's comment about who's wearing a watch now, I think is exactly the point. You know, I don't know what the next iPhone is. I don't know what the next watch is. I don't know what the next Twitter is. And it'd be very, very difficult, I think, to write that cookbook that would allow us to see 20 years out. However, I'm pretty sure that HTTP hasn't changed all that much since I first started playing with it in the early 90s. And whatever it is, it's got to be based off of the standard web-based protocols that we have been using now for over 20 years. And the implementation of the continued approach in open geospatial standards needs to play a role. But the notion of one, I think, has changed dramatically.
Now, in that regard, let me ask you the big organizational question. There's general agreement that there needs to be some kind of integration. I mean, that's the whole point of a place-based approach and the technologies that are available to be able to enable it, to support it. The question is, how do you achieve that overall integration? And it's a big organizational question in the federal government, not to say in the entire federal system. But within the federal government, based on the experience that you all have had and from the different perspectives that you come from, what would be the best organizational approach to attempt to integrate these different technologies in concert with the place-based approach? Are we talking about putting it in a single high-level agency at the staff level, at the White House level? Are we talking about putting it in an operating agency? Are we talking about something other than where you locate it organizationally, but rather how it may be distributed? What are your thoughts on that?
Can I ask a question there? When you say integrate, what do you mean by integrate?
What I'm thinking of is an integration both of the approach to place-based policies. How can we have consistent place-based policies throughout the federal government, and at the same time, how do we integrate the technologies, and in particular the information technologies, communications technologies, and more specifically the geographical and geospatial technologies that can be supportive of that integrated place-based approach?
Okay, so I'd like to address the second part of that, not first part, because I think that's all about leadership and how you manage that in terms of making sure that everybody understands what each else is doing. Kind of my comment about, playing your position and being disciplined in that manner. The second piece is, particularly coming from defense, integration means something very specific. It's kind of like the word secure, right? I can tell the Army or Marine to secure a building, they'll take it by force and set up a perimeter and set up security watches. I can tell a sailor to secure a building, he'll shut off the lights and lock the safe, turn off the coffee pot and go home. And the Air Force will get me a lease with an option to buy. So, in my mind, working all those years, I say, words mean a lot to people. And when I say integrate, when I talk to industry, it means something very specific in terms of cost and schedule and complexity to get to a certain level of performance and support. And if I say integrate to somebody at a data level, they're aggregating or conflating data to a certain level. If I say to an operator, he or she's actually looking at different pieces of information to make a decision. So it really is important to understand the context of what you mean when you say that. At a system level, I think we need to be standards based and have that approach. And I really do believe at the core of it, especially when you look at least my observations on commercial aspects of content. Content management is the place, and having the standards that allow for content management services to actually let content be discoverable and consumable by users, and I'll use that term generally, is a critical piece to that. The applications and how agile and flexible, like I said, my kid can mash up widgets on my home computer and gets these amazing kind of results for what he's trying to do in terms of even gaming. That's integration, but at a much different level, and a much different level of understanding. So I think you have to be careful about that when you use words like that.
Others? Yep.
I'd like to address the leadership part of the question. I think a lot of us have been asking this question: where is the right place organizationally to coordinate these activities and to do this? And I don't know that there is any one right place to do it. I certainly don't think that a single agency or department should be created that does this, because I think, as we've all pointed out, we all have a mission that requires this technology and adapted to our own purposes. I do think, getting back to Raphael's comments on purposeful leadership, I think the place that has the coordination authority and that role in the public policy context is the White House. And I think, we've seen some of the developments that we've talked about today are driven by White House level activities. Raphael's others, that have really helped on the political side of helping us get better coordinated and work together on these things. I think that, Zach's comment earlier about the budget people at OMB and the technology people at OMB having shared responsibility in this is important. There's probably no one right place, but it is across, boundaries, even inside the White House. But I want to expand that a little bit. So we talked about the NSDI and whether we've achieved, the full vision of the NSDI. And I think the thing that we all recognize now is this isn't just about the feds. It's not just about government. There's a much bigger community of practice and that can help with place-based approaches, and that it has technology components. I think we need to be cognizant of that as well. And Mark's comments about OGC's role, not just in technology setting, but in terms of bringing together communities to work on shared problems. I don't think the federal government should be addressing these problems on its own or just as government. I think we need to bring in the private sector, the academia, the NGOs, and others to be talking about how we can work together to effectively meet some of our shared mission needs. And we have restrictions on that in federal government context in many cases, so we need to work together to see how we can do that as